reported.
Yeah, so we had to ask him, when we originally got it, we had about half these columns, and so we were like, okay, we can't really, expand on this. If we had a volunteer, we could expand on it. If anybody wants to volunteer, come see me afterwards. We could pull out the acreage. Each lease is gonna tell you where the acreage. We could pull out the sources, so the individual canals. We could pull out the, what else could we pull out? Oh, the use. So not all of these are ag, right? So we have, I hope I got it on here. So we have Lee County Utilities. This is a public water supply. This one's really interesting because Lee County on average is using, and I have this in the slides later, is using about 50% of their allocation. What district staff told me is that they over allocate, right? So we have a 20-year lease. They don't want to redo it all the time. They're projecting growth, so they over allocate, and that's what's going on there. To your point about U.S. Sugar, so they got 21,533 billion gallons, and they're way under.
Okay, I didn't see
Yeah.
the decimal point.
Yeah, no, they're way under. I don't know what the math is, 1/7. Yeah.
I
so-
apologize to you.
No. Well, I mean, so it brings up a really interesting point, right? So why are they 7 times over their use? And so I asked that question today, and the answer was, well, these could be really wet years. It seems a little fishy to me, especially when you're doing a budget. So I think I have West Palm Beach on here. Do we have it on here? Do you guys see? Fourth one. Okay, this one's good because anybody that's participating in LOSUM has heard a lot about West Palm Beach's drinking water supply and how that's really at jeopardy. So in terms of their allocation, they're at 41,800, and they're using about a fourth of that. And that's honestly not even that much. 10 billion gallons.
So the allocation is what is set by the district and by permit. And then whatever the usage is below that, it's apparently. But once they set the allocation, do they have a limit on, so let's talk about a freeze. So the freeze, like the lower East Coast is saying, we've allocated all we're gonna allocate. And can they issue more permits for that or not? The freeze?
So you could get another permit if you came up with alternative water supply. What they've done, what Miami-Dade did, what it seems like most of the municipalities do is they build it way high and then come in way low, and so then they have plenty of space.
But the usage is self-reported.
Yeah. It is, there's a calibration, they check it every 5 years, except in the EAA where it's all a black box.
Okay, so,
Jude?
I was on the Palm Beach Soil and Water Conservation District for 8 years, and one thing I found out is they don't really meter this water. This is all estimated, and so these numbers are all suspect because it's estimated numbers. Nobody's really metering. Like in your house, your water's metered, right? They know how much you use, but they don't know how much an agriculture entity is using. It's not metered. They're not metering the water they're putting on their fields. It's all estimated. And so I think this is one of the problems I've always had. This is all suspect. These numbers are very, it's all estimated. You don't know whether that's really the number they're actually using or not. There's really no way to verify it.
There's a lot of questions, more questions to answer, gotta keep moving. I had something funny to say, but I apologize.
While you think of that funny thing, where's the supply side of this?
They could contribute primarily.
And so does it balance?
No, I mean, I'm still working on that. I'm still I haven't drawn a lot of firm conclusions yet. I'm still working through it, but one of the things that's hard about this, and it was so helpful to talk to staff today, is I'm looking all over for this stuff, and they can say, oh, well, if you go to this page and scroll down to this thing, and then click here, and you go down to this, and it's it's right there. It's oh, okay. So I think one of the things that, look, who should really be standing here? Our state elected officials. They should be the ones really doing this, right? They should be the ones writing letters, digging down. They have the authority. We're trying to put it together as a community group, but it really should be our elected officials at the state level. This table which has been so valuable, came from our federal elected official, not our state elected official. So, okay. So anybody wants this table, you can have it, I'll send it to you, it's really fascinating. Or we could even put it up on the website. maybe,
Yeah,
Barbara?
it'll be on the website.
So everybody knows what an acre foot is now,
Yes.
no longer confusing, really important stuff, makes the math easier. Because otherwise you're dealing with 325,000 gallons, and that gets big fast. Okay, by the numbers, so the LoSA area had 236 permits. One of the weird things about permits is the way they combine them, right? So if I'm a landowner and I have 6 non-contiguous parcels and I'm drawing from 6 different canals, I can get 1 permit. So from an analytics perspective, it just gets harder to see. Apparently there is a GIS map where these things are layered over. I haven't been able to figure that out yet, but I'm working on it. So 236 acres, I'm sorry, 236 permits. We could total the acreage. We'd have to click on all the permits and pull them out. We haven't done that. All right, so in terms of gallons, that's in the, what, billion? Okay, so a lot, so that's why we use 2.6 million acre feet. And so then the Everglades agricultural area, as I mentioned, is the black box, for, not for geological reasons, for historic reasons. So maybe that's something we can think about changing. Okay, so I went ahead and filtered out, yes, Paul?
Yeah, so 2.6 million acre feet, the lake's about 500,000 acres, so that's 5 vertical feet of water permitted per year. If they gave out all that water, the lake could go down 5 feet.
Okay,
All that water.
that's over permitted.
I was trying to do that in my head.
Yeah,
You need a
but
bigger
that's,
checkbook.
literally, they promise people 5 feet of water out of the lake every year.
So yeah, could you imagine if you ran your bank account like that? Your credit would be terrible. Okay, so, of the permits we had, right, of the reported ones, so not in the EAA, we had 114 permits, not sure of the acres, 1.6 million acre feet. What we used was 1.1, so we used about 70% of the allocation. So another way to argue this is to say that 30% of the permitted water wasn't used in this Lake Okeechobee service area. So, or over permitting by 30%. So what happens in a water restriction? Across the board cuts, and as Paul can tell you much better than I, some of these permittees get these across the board cuts, and they still don't use all the water because they're so inflated on their allocation, right, Paul? Yeah. So I mean that's a weird concept, and then it's a further weird policy decision, a weird concept to say that the environment goes through droughts, and we don't protect against droughts in the environment. The thing they're not really talking about there is that we have made these droughts so much worse, and so are they really the same kind of thing? Okay, so this is what a permit looks like. You have the years here, so this is a 20-year permit. You have the number of acres. You have the who the permit's issued to, where it's located, and then some disclaimers. You get the total amount of water, and then you get a monthly allocation of water. This is further down in the same permit, when it will expire, what the classifications are used. The version of impoundment, that can be like moving water into like a canal, your own private canal. And then ag irrigation is one of the uses. Source, C43, total allocation in millions of gallons, monthly allocation. So that's what they basically look like. They can vary a little bit, but they're pretty much there. All right, I just pulled a few examples pretty randomly just to kind of try to figure out what if inflation was going on here, or overinflating numbers. All right, so Lee County Utilities allocated 12.5 million for public utilities, so for citizens and whatnot. So unused water, 2017, 46%, 2016, 48%, 2015, 47%, 2014, 53%. And so in talking to district staff, the idea there was to overinflate for municipalities because we expect them to grow and we don't want to have to reissue them permits. You'll notice, well, I don't think I have it on there, but this permit was issued in 2011, so we're about halfway through. So, how inflated was it, or how underinflated was it, you know what I mean? So if we're halfway through, they're not really getting close. Okay, so this was the top user in, not in the EAA, but in LOSA. And it's called the C3 Canal Group. I think it's primary sugar cane. They allocate different amounts based on different crop use. So it's a multi, factored level. They have an algorithm and matrix and all these things. But this one came out really, really high. So, the largest issue here at 56.6, and then they're not using about 90% of it on average. So, how that impacts the rest of the system is a question I can't really answer yet. But I think it's a really interesting question. Why are we? One thing I can say, pretty conclusive. If we have a 30% cut across the board, how much short of water do you think the C3 Canal Group's going to be? None. There's still surplus. And so this is a transferable right. So apparently these permits used to be 5-year permits, and now we've kind of moved them into a year. And I think that was done in rulemaking, maybe early 2000s. And so that's something we can undo. We can undo and do anything we want, but that's without the legislature. So that's a lot of surplus, and not a lot of shared diversity in terms of drought. Another one, water control district, Henry Hillard, second highest allocation, 56.5, and then we're pretty much at 70 to 80 unused. So that's again really, really high.
That's how much they're using. They're not using.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And so one of the explanations I got there was, well, they have sub-users, and the sub-users might not all be reporting, and it's like, that doesn't seem to make sense to me, but, maybe. There might be reasonable explanations for some of this, but they're still high. Okay, one more, Doodle LaBelle Farms, this was number 3. So again, 56.5, very high, and unused, 70s, high to mid, so that's a lot. Okay, so this is a table I got from Congressman Mast's office, that I believe they got from the district. And so this is the 2, right? This is the Lower East Coast, what we looked at the first map, and then LOSA, so long and gray, the lake. And you can see where the uses go in here. And I'm not sure why public isn't in here. But public, yeah, I guess it's land. Yeah, so public is a small percentage. So of the, I did about 36 permits, and 2 of them were, it was Lee County and Palm Beach, and they were the bigger ones, right? So in terms of the public allocation, public's way down. And that's one of the things that we as a community, as we figure out, what's going on here, we need to figure out let's not conflate the different uses of water, because that's the argument that this new group out of Palm Beach County is trying to make, think about West Palm Beach's water, and it's just really conflating, right? Like, are you fighting for aggregation, which is fine if you are, but just say it, or are you fighting for, public water supply? There's a legal doctrine, nobody's taps are gonna go off. That's well protected. So that's about it. So this is the good thing, right? So I did a presentation last week down in Delray, and the lady was like, that was really great, I'm gonna go kill myself. And so I've really been trying to figure out how to make these things more happy. Unfortunately, the truth isn't always positive. But one thing I talked about with a few people, is the broken window theory, right? So if a neighborhood has a broken window, it's more likely to eventually have crime, because people think that people don't care. So if we all care a little bit, whether it be picking up trash or coming to meetings like this, we'll build a culture, we'll start getting it right. So that's one thing to be positive about. The other thing to be positive about is this statute. So I left off the first number here, it's in 373, it's around here. But the district, by regulation, may reserve water for the environment. So this hasn't happened in about 5 years. We can also revisit water for the environment. So there's 2 mechanisms for the environment to get water: minimum flows and levels, which they have a really bad out by the legislature, and they're basically like, well, if you have a plan, then you don't have to meet them. If you have a plan to eventually meet them, you don't have to meet them. So, you know, we have a plan, it's just gonna take like 5 decades. Charles?
Earlier, you made a big point about the fact that it was not the board, but the senior staff member, in effect, who was making these decisions. Well, I would say that's not all that unusual in government or agency situations. But normally, there's recourse. If you disagree as a citizen with standing with the decision made by that director or the staff member, you can usually appeal to the board, or like at the county level, if the staff is authorized to issue licenses or permits, and you come in and make an issue, you can usually appeal to the board. And then if that appeal fails, you always have the courts as a recourse. Does this work the same way? That is, if the director is over allocating, and if you look at the big permits and the unused amounts, clearly they are. You know, US Sugar, Duda, I mean, their permitted amounts are far more than they normally use. They've got reserves that are just incredible. And there might not actually be a reason to be freezing allocations based on the existing permits, because the existing permits are permitting a lot more than is being used. Can somebody go into the district in this case and say, wait a minute, this is weird, the board should look at this, or can you take it to court and say this doesn't make sense?
So you can pretty much always take it to court. Doesn't mean you always win. This is a good statute. Like, I read the statute and I was like, wow, this could really work well. So there's a couple mechanisms. So one, there's issuance hearings. So like as they're about to put the permit out, they'll announce it, and if anybody in here objects, you know, you can make them have a hearing. And I think there might be a threshold there, but yeah, there's that. There's also a complaint forum, and so you can complain and you know, potentially get reviewed. So there are definitely some mechanism in statute. One thing I would say, and this is maybe something Paul could help answer, but one of the district staff, you know, basically said, you know, make sure you emphasize that it's a 1 in 10 year drought permit. And I like went around and around. I'm assessed 3 times. Like, what does that mean, right? And so the idea is, I think, that they maybe overinflate them intentionally because they're trying to account for that 1 in 10. But I'll turn it to anybody in the room who can try to explain that one a little bit, because I've been working through it and it hasn't worked.
The guidance is they're supposed to try to make sure that they can provide 100% of the water that the applicant needs in 9 out of 10 years. And if there's a 1 in 10 drought, then we say, well, we can't guarantee you a full allocation. But what they try to do with Okeechobee is keep it so deep that even in a 1 in 10 year, you can still get enough water out to give them their full allocation. So, yeah, well, they used to keep the lake above 15 feet, you know, in the 80s and 90s all the time, just so when a 1 in 10 year drought came, they didn't get hurt that year either. And it just wrecked the lake. And but you're right, when you drill down into this, there's just so many layers of things. And basically, when they get into a drought now, if you think about a plant growing in a field, it didn't get rain, so it actually needs more supplemental water. And what they do is they double the allocation, and then they give them a 15% cutback from twice as much water. And so they're giving more water during a drought and calling it a cutback.
Right, and so is that illegal? Is it grounds for, you know, complaint? Who knows? Is it really bad policy? I'd say so. You know,
Well, and when you give out, you know, in a normal year, they take about 1 foot, and in a drought year, they'll take almost 2 feet. And you think about, you know, trying to protect fish and wildlife, if you're giving out more water to a drought stress from a drought stress lake, that's not protecting fish and wildlife. So there's a lot of inconsistencies in it. You're exactly right. You start talking to them about why does this work, and you get all these strange answers. It's hard to pin it down on how does this work. So where do you come on?
Yeah, I probably have over allocated my time.
I just want to say that this just demonstrates how much power agriculture has. And the governing board, if you deny a permit, that person can take it to the governing board. But if you approve a permit, they are not allowed to take it to the governing board. It's only if you deny a permit, so this whole thing is biased. And that's true for ERP and the other ones, because we used to be able to go to the governing board, and the whole idea is the public could make itself heard, because the governing board had to vote in the sunshine, but the staff is not in the sunshine. There is a meeting once, used to be once a month, about permitting. I was the only person out of 16 counties that showed up. If I didn't show up, that meeting was canceled. I got 5 people to show up the last meeting because I was on vacation, and so there were actually people there. The other thing that's really important is there was administrative hearings, but the governor has appointed the head judge for administrative hearings, and that's where a lot of this would go if you challenge me to the administrative judges. But he's appointing a judge who doesn't believe that the administrative people should be able to make a judgment. So that is really going to weaken the ability to challenge this. It's the weakening of the administrative process. So sorry, I didn't mean to take too long, but I think there's a lot of this going on. You need to be aware of.
Where does Nestle fall into all of this? Do they, because they're, for the public, they're bottling it for the public?
Right.
Killed Lisa.
So it's a different water management district, but, you know, in theory, if it fits within the budget.
Yeah, if they came down
And
there
then,
next.
you know, probably taxes are in the public interest and commerce is in the public interest. So, you know, you could argue it under such a broad statute that it's perfectly reasonable and no strings will dry up, but we know that's, you know, the strings are getting nailed. So, you know, I think it goes back to what is our checking account having?
Thank you, Alex. Thanks. I think we're gonna keep learning more about, like Jackie said, we all have to continue to learn more about consumptive use permits versus environmental resource permits, and what the difference in how the consumptive use permits are actually allocating or, you know, over allocating water supply, and what happens during drought situations like Paul is iterating, all affects our environment that we're all here working about, and that's our river environment. So next year, we're gonna hear from Martin County and some of the local governments of City of Stuart after that. So here's Katie. Thanks, Katie.
Yeah, thanks for that presentation, Alex. I think our attorney's gonna really like that. But if you didn't meet me last time, my name's Katie Bose. I'm an environmental specialist for Martin County, and I'm also taking over Diane Hughes' position in the interim. She's been on extended leave, but she's been doing a lot better, so we expect she'll be back around January, hopefully. John Mill gave a pretty extensive update last meeting, so it's gonna be short and sweet, which Martha liked. So first off, the Martin County Commissioners were in DC last week, and that was to meet with the Everglades Caucus to promote a Senate application package that includes $200 million for CERP, which is Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan. And we expect that the Senate is going to pick up that bill in the next week or so. And the commissioners will be back in DC next week for the Southeast Florida Ecosystem Restoration Task Force meeting, and that's on Tuesday, if you keep tabs with that. But what I'm most excited to talk to you about is the county is currently, we had a really large grant last year to do a large-scale vulnerability plan and resiliency plan, and basically myself and other county members and consultants are taking a large amount of data, elevation certificates, land uses, an unimaginable amount of data to look at projected sea level rise impacts and climate change impacts on a very fine scale, on a community neighborhood scale. So the product of that is going to be a mapping tool that will be able to see, you know, different level impacts to infrastructure, roadways, and that's going to guide our capital improvement projects in the future. And it will also fulfill the community rating system sea level rise component for our watershed master plan. So in the future, we'll be holding community meetings for people to look at the implications for their area and also go through adaptation and mitigation strategies. that's a lot of work, but, so another thing to mark your calendars for, DEP is hosting a public meeting on November 5th. And that's for the St. Lucie Estuary VMAP, which they said no acronym, Basin Management Action Plan. If you're not familiar with that already, it's basically the guidelines for different stakeholders in the estuary watershed. So Martin County Agriculture, St. Lucie County, City of Stuart, and it shows what are the legal requirements for our nutrient reductions. Governor DeSantis, when he took office, mandated that there was a St. Lucie Estuary VMAP update within 1 year. So for that update, Martin County has submitted 5 projects, and we are expecting to meet 100%, close to 100% of our nitrogen and phosphorus allocations. That doesn't mean we're going to stop having new projects and new education. We'll just have 200% for our next one. So yeah, if you'd like to attend that public meeting, it's going to go through different stakeholder allocations, where they're at currently, and different modeling tools that DEP has come up with. And that's November 5th at the Blake Library from 9 to 11 a.m. So that's all I got. Does anyone have any questions for me?
Thank you. So that same day, November 5th, is also a meeting about the works of the district that South Florida Water Management District's doing, November 5th out in Okeechobee. So some of us might be going to that, some of us might be going to the Blake Library for that, so stay tuned for all these meetings coming up. Hey, thanks, Mark. Here's Ben. Welcome, Ben.
Hi, everybody. Just to keep it brief, actually, Martin County took a lot of the information, and I for future updates, I want to kind of just add something that we're doing a little bit on the side here and there. Not a lot of information, but the one thing I did talk to our Public Works Director about for next year, and something that I've been kind of harping on for a while now, is our septic to sewer conversions are going to be, as far as the infrastructure in the city installing these, will be 100% complete by 4th fiscal quarter next year, 2020.
What do you got for next in the house?
Well, and so obviously there are, I don't want to call them enclaves, but there are places that we haven't, that just aren't either reachable yet or haven't been reached yet. That will be by 2020. The other thing that we need to do as a community is encourage our neighbors, our residents who haven't connected yet, that have access to it, to find the means and do the best that they can to do that, because that's the latter half of these septic to sewer conversions, is getting those folks who have the capability to do it and encourage them to do so. So that's a good thing. That the city is also with the BMAPs, the Basin Management Action Plans. The city has consistently, been kind of the lead in the pack for municipalities there. I'm sure some of you are aware of that. We're looking to the new BMAPs and to see what those are. We certainly will probably have projects down the road if there's a requirement for us to improve that. But I think this community in general, not just the city of Stuart, has really been proactive in that regard. And then the last thing I'll say, just to keep it brief again, is I might steal Mark's thunder here, the project delivery team meetings with the Army Corps are, our third official one, or we had one in interim that was a webinar. Our third official meeting as a PDT with the Army Corps is tomorrow. That will be down in actually Homestead. I actually won't be going to this one myself. I'll be attending via the webinar. It'll be an all-day affair. There are a lot of small committees that are kind of meeting to discuss all the different facets of that project and that plan. I can tell you right now, they're making a lot of headway. A lot of positive things are coming from that, as far as our area and in the Lake Okeechobee discharges coming here. Obviously, it remains the city's goal to ensure that we receive zero discharges. My intent is to hope in some way, shape, or form the Army Corps can write into its protocol that a last action, kind of like the nuclear option is what we call in policymaking, would be to discharge to our area. We don't want that to be one of their primary options. We want that to be what you would call an action or option of last resort, a measure of last resort. So that's something that we're hoping that we can roll in by the end of this. We have to get buy-in from other communities and all that. We can't tie the hands of the Army Corps entirely, but to at least from a protocol perspective, especially how the military operates, you want that to be a last measure, a last objective. And so really, that's one of our goals, but if anyone has questions, feel free to stop me anytime, happy to help.
So what I've been is on the PD team, that's the project delivery team for the Lake Okeechobee Service Operating Manual, LOSA. And there's another LOSA meeting coming in on November 21st in Okeechobee as well, I think, right, Ben?
The next one will be Okeechobee
Okeechobee.
webinar in January, or
And
sorry, in December for the
December
holiday.
webinar.
And then January, it might go to the West Coast,
Okay,
we'll see.
that's-
Yeah.
Also, we have with us today Patrick Dayan
Patrick.
of St. Lucie County. So he's
Thanks, Patrick.
he's
We reached out and thanks for Patrick for coming to introduce himself. St. Lucie County, Public Works.
Good evening, everybody. This is kind of like a pinch hitting for me. Barb invited me here yesterday, so to tail on to a lot of the information that was already covered by Ben and by Katie about the good work that they're doing down here on the south end. Up in St. Lucie County, I want to report that in 2018, the county was very successful in passing a half-cent infrastructure sales tax. Part of that part of that money that's raised is going to go towards water quality projects. Our county has been sorely needing a lot of surplus to be able to do the projects that have been on the books. Primarily, we're focused on neighborhood urban retrofits. That's a lot of what my group does, is to go into these underserved neighborhoods that are all existing, planted back in the 40s and 50s, they're all in septic tanks, come in there and do modern day stormwater treatment with dry detention, grass swales to collect that roadway runoff and provide treatment that meets state water quality regulations. I'm just hoping this thing keeps falling over. Along with that, we're also helping to advocate for our components of the SERP plan, which are our C23, 24 North and South reservoirs, and our C23 and 24 STA, and there's a C25 STA. Those are the main three canals that actually come down into St. Lucie County. The C25 empties out into Taylor Creek. Anyone who's familiar up there, that's right by the Fort Pierce Canyon. So we have the benefit of being in two basin management action plans. There is the St. Lucie Estuary Basin Management Action Plan, and there's one that is for the Indian River Lagoon itself. It's a central Indian River Lagoon. We're told that both of those are going through revisions right now. We know about the St. Lucie Estuary. Next year, there's going to be some additional works that go into the actual Indian River Lagoon, so further action may be required by the county, but we're continuing to do our part to make sure that our capital improvement program has all of those necessary water quality goals, objectives, and projects to help stop the flows coming down out of the North Fork, as well as all the work that comes out of the South Fork. Thank you very much for your time.
I think Craig Wade did an article about the recent allocation for state allocation for some SERP funding, and there's a teak, hammock, and.
Yes.
Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, the county received $2.4 million for 3 separate projects. We have the teak hammock restoration project. It's a hydrologic restoration that's happening in western St. Lucie County. We're diverting some plug ditches and creating a water retention facility that's going to help to create some additional wildlife habitat. There's also a Becker Oxbow reconnection. That's part of the North Fork of